If you want a magic item, if you want a piece of armor, don't ask me. Maybe I can use the book that I was talking about as inspiration. So if you're running for 1 or if you're running for 2, the player's health is a lot of different things, not just their hit points. I think sometimes DMs take the wrong lessons from things like video games. I ran a short-lived campaign with 2 players. Hey, Just a Geek, have you experienced having only 2 members to DM for? I'm having trouble balancing cool encounters without adding an NPC to help my prep for a campaign with my friends. Running a game for only 2 player characters, it's actually pretty close to running for 1. Obviously, it's a little bit better, just mathematically speaking. But a lot of the information that you can find as advice for running a solo game or a one-person game would also carry over for this. Matt Hovel's got some great videos about it. When you're running the scenarios, let's say a combat encounter for 2 player characters, you can always scale the encounter up. It's really, really hard to scale the encounter down. So if they're facing somebody, let's say they're facing an assassin. Well, 1 assassin, is a good place to start. And if that seems like they're going to make quick work of it, which you'll know probably in 1 or 2 rounds, right? Maybe half a round, you'll know. Then there's another one that sneaks in the back, and then you can sort of balance it while you run it. And eventually you'll get a sense of what is the right amount of threat for those players, because every 2 players are different. It's worth at least considering that the player's health is a lot of different things, not just their hit points. So if you're running for 1 or if you're running for 2, maybe these goblins that you never intended to totally wipe the party, maybe they bring the members to down to 0 or starting to take out the party like that, but maybe actually what they do is they steal their weapons and their gold and they leave them for dead. That could be, a devastating outcome that the players aren't going to enjoy, but it allows them to keep playing and get better and allows for you to balance the game. Things like that are going to be super situational and to your own taste as a DM and how lethal, how early and how lethal you want your game to be. In a 2-player game, if you do, or any sort of short-handed game, if you do find it necessary to include an NPC to help, my preference is not to make any sort of NPC that's helping the party great or badass or anything. In fact, making them a bit of a drain, making them a target. If they're helping in combat at all, what they're doing is they're drawing attacks away from the players so that they can take care of things. It's a real bummer as a player to feel like, I think, that you're being one-upped by an NPC adventurer. So I would avoid that if I can. Ninja, you said, may I ask if there's a way a level 20 wizard, being basically a god, could cast 2 leveled spells without multi-classing? It's kind of odd how they can only... The way that you're phrasing that question makes me think that you're asking from a rules as written perspective. I'll be honest, I don't really know. Haven't had that kind of situation happen a lot, but they should. Probably a pretty permissive, at least when it comes to sort of big ideas and trying them out. Like I'm especially just like talking about it here. I mean, so much of the implementation of these things and how they work has so much to do with the table dynamic and what the players want and what sounds exciting and interesting to everybody. I mean, everything's changeable. Everything can be revised. For wizards casting 2 spells, especially at that high level, the vibe, just to answer, I guess, the question from my homebrew sort of interests, the vibe of a wizard at that level, more and more of a wizard's spells start to become more like cantrips to me. Like they start to become, there should almost be a suite of spells that is sort of that wizard's game. That's his sort of genre, as he sort of, learns them and masters them and tweaks them. And using those, he's almost, you know, he's almost unstoppable. I think I feel like that's the vibe of an elder wizard. I know that if that was something that was interesting in my game, I wouldn't let the rules as written stop me. I guess I'd be happy to just like homebrew something, or everybody just accept that that's how this works, right? I think that's totally fine too. It's just our playground. So, Umber, don't let that dissuade you. It's all just ideas and sort of live game design. That's sort of how I view. That's what's cool about tabletop stuff, is that the game designer is sitting right there, and in most cases is making adjustments on the fly. Cage King, that's a good question. A cleric that doesn't know the entity. It's all flavor, right? It's all like, is it possible? Technically, absolutely. Narratively, so you don't want you probably for the trope of the cleric, you probably don't want them communicating with a force that they don't understand, right? But what if a cleric is just tied into maybe a long, almost forgotten practice, forgotten rites or something, and maybe that sort of spiritual pathway could be co-opted by any number of forces, and that's part of the struggle of keeping that alive, is almost the cleansing, or the purity of that discipline that the cleric follows is maybe always under threat. Kark, Metavari is awesome. Metavari is a friend of mine. His name is Nayutesh behind Metavari. When I put up videos back in August about doing some crafting for DM at Gen Con, artist behind Metavari was one of the DMs in that game. We just kind of run in the similar circles, and so he was the DM for a game at Gen Con that involved a race through the desert on fantastical ships, fantastical boats, and vehicles. And I crafted, I made a purple worm with a raft on it, so it was like a boat. I made a goblin kind of war machine, which I'm not totally crazy about. That was a rush job. An arcane boat, like an arcane wizard's boat, and like a construct, like an artificer's sort of hobbled together like invention contraption that was the one that they got to sort of, the players got to sort of choose and assemble their pieces as part of the game. And I still need to run my own adventures with some of those fantastical desert racing vehicles. They've just been on my shelf, and a couple of them I want to revisit because I think I could polish them up a little bit more. But that's for after Mimics, right? I don't have time for that nonsense right now. I got Mimics to paint. Hey, Sarah. We are painting Mimic monsters and leading up to painting this guy that I crafted on stream, I don't know, a few weeks ago now. He's been primed and waiting to be painted. This is like a toy chest in clay turning into sort of I guess you could say a giant Mimic, which I could certainly use it in a game, or just sort of something to have on my shelf on my desk. The first time I worked with Das Clay was making my Elder Brain fight. I made an Elder Brain boss fight thing that is fine. I need to revisit it. Then the second time was making the Purple Worm vehicle. And the third time was that big Mimic that I figure once I get done painting all of this variety of different Mimics, I'll have a pretty good sense of how I want to paint that big guy. And that's sort of my reward for getting all of this other painting done. So these guys remind me of the Cuckoo Clock of Doom, the Goosebumps story about a little boy traveling through time, which, if you know me, it's probably not a surprise that that's one of my favorite stories I read as a kid. This clock comes from an antique store, and he turns the head on the cuckoo backwards, and he begins aging backwards. And so he starts at his 13th birthday or something, and then has it again, and then goes back a few years, and it's about really, can he get back to the clock in the antique store as a toddler, with his own brain still intact, to turn it back around, or is he going to basically poof himself out of existence? It's a great little Twilight Zone story for kids. Maybe I can use the book that I was talking about as inspiration. Everybody has their favorite set of children's horror novels that they read, just ready to reference over on their shelf at a moment's notice. So this is one of my favorite books as a kid, The Cuckoo Clock of Doom. And so colors-wise, certainly this blue-eyed, sort of yellow cuckoo, some inspiration there. So let me tuck that over here. Matthew said, how would you go about running a mysterious merchant that players would not try to hijack? Players want what merchants have, and they want it for free. That merchant would not be able to sell the things that entice the players without being able to protect himself. I go pretty soft on this idea for newer players or players that are early on in a campaign. A new player swiped a potion bottle, sent the old lady looking over there, and then swiped the potion bottle here, and sessions later when they went to use it, they came to find out that this potion that they thought did X actually was just mundane, was just water. It didn't actually do what it said because that was the enchantment on the potion bottle when it wasn't purchased correctly. It was a really soft failure, right? But if I have players that are either working as a group, it becomes like a group thing if it's a bigger deal, or if it's maybe players that have been around a couple of times, practically and like within the world, especially if when you want to use spells that exist or written rules as written kind of spells, look into wards and glyphs and stuff like that, like protective wards on merchant trucks or caravans or shops. If you try to do anything with particularly magical things, then it could trigger all sorts of effects that doesn't even require somebody to cast something on you for something truly high level. And if the merchant is aware of it, I mean, almost anything would be possible. I mean, the merchant's shop is sort of their domain, and while their magic may be limited in certain ways, I think within their space, you don't want to mess with the person that owns a magic shop. That's my take anyway. John Michael, one way I do it is the magic merchant doesn't have everything the players could want. At a certain point, at a certain level of the game, shopping should almost entirely be, okay, what are you looking for? And if it seems reasonable that it would be there, then that's great. Then they find it and can start haggling, right? Because who doesn't like a little bit of haggling? My general advice to my players is that if you want something for your character, don't ask me. If you want a magic item, if you want a piece of armor, I don't know, if you want a wagon, whatever it is, don't ask me, the DM. Make your character ask people in the world, and I guarantee you will find a path to that. It might not be an easy path. It might not be cheap or free. It might be dangerous, but you're going to find that path. My players are looking for a magic item that does something very specific and very, interesting to them. Odds are that by the time they ask 2 or 3 people in my world, somebody's going to remember, oh, there's a legend about somebody that did something like that, or there's a map, or actually I know somebody in the next town that could help you with that. You're going to find a way there. The world is going to open up to you, in my world at least, if you actually use it to try to find these things. That's what I always try to encourage my players to do. Also because I hate the idea that I'm giving something to players. I don't want to do it. It's just not interesting to me. It's like, hey, I really want a sword that does whatever. It's like, go into the world. Ask the world for it. Talk to the world about it. Don't talk to me about it. Small scale adventure that leads to a large one. Gotcha. Think big and then go small. What is the biggest threat that whatever occur in your game world, and maybe the clock is ticking and it's going to happen, right? And then you say, okay, if that were going on, how would that affect things kind of one level down? And if that were happening, what would happen one level down? And if that were happening, down, 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 and bring that scale basically as far down as you can until, maybe at the topmost level it is that, the king's mind has been replaced and he's setting things into motion to allow, mind flayers to basically emerge from the Underdark and take over the material plane. Maybe that's the big scale thing. But if you scale that all the way down into the town, it's like, the Baron in this area is really sending out some odd decrees. He wants us to do this now. Like, we don't think this makes any sense. Like, you can scale down any big threat down to something regional or in a town, and it can trail up to, but like, if that's actually happening, if the king's mind has been replaced and he's doing things, he's probably ignoring certain threats and problems that are around, and it's probably becoming a bit more chaotic, out throughout the region. And you could have an adventure all about sort of one of these villains that has risen up due to the king's carelessness, and you only find out as that story goes on that it's connected to this larger, bigger threat. So that's the type of, I think that's how you take, just in general, whatever you're trying to do, taking the biggest threat and then scaling it down and making sure that sort of the things will lead to one another or are connected in some way. Yeah, that's the way I would approach it. Matthew, when players level up, how would you go about making zombies and skeletons stronger, or would you use them in hordes? So anything can be leveled up. A stat block is just what we use. A stat block isn't something that players actually interact with. Players only interact with the world that's put in front of them, whatever they experience. And what they experience is that an 18 hits, but a 15 doesn't, or a 17 doesn't hit and a 22 hits. That's all they really know. So if what you want is a set of stronger skeletons, pick a stat block that is the right size and then reflavor it to be your skeleton. Who's to say that these skeletons aren't they weren't barbarian tribesmen in their previous life, and so they just are tougher. That's probably the easiest way to do it. I think there's other ways that you can ramp up the difficulty by introducing different terrain, different weapons, different scenarios, putting other characters and NPCs at risk. Like, there's ways to add difficulty without just amping up like HP or whatever. I think sometimes DMs take the wrong lessons from things like video games. I think this is why a lot of DMs have it in their heads that, hey, this would be fun. I'm going to give my players a battle that they can't win. This is what's going to knock them back and make them want to regain all of their previous abilities or whatever. It's a trope in video games. I don't think it translates very well to the table. I think that's just it's an understandable misstep. We look at games that we like and we say, how do we take that and use it in this game that I want to run? It makes sense that it happens, but I don't think it's hardly ever fun. So steal ideas, don't steal exact implementations. Ideas are great and should be reused and refiltered and recreated in different ways. But an exact implementation of something is typically going to fall flat. So with anything that you like, the question is, what's the idea? And I think in a video game, a fight that you can't win is trying to create a sort of narrative moment. If you want to have that experience in a video game, you sort of have to design that experience to happen. You can't just sort of say, oh, they stepped on that trap and a block fell on them, and now this is their moment. So you can kind of see what I'm getting at. The idea is to have an interesting narrative moment, and that is at our fingertips at the table. We don't need to use the exact implementation of you guys can't win this fight. We can roll with actual character decisions and react to them and find the narrative moments in that kind of give and take, that back and forth. It's just it's just really hard. It's really hard to sort of figure out, like, I'm not even sure saying it, like, is that true, is that the idea? It probably depends on the exact game and the exact scenario as to what the game designers were trying to accomplish. A lot of stuff will translate pretty well. I love using older editions for stuff. I just found a what is it, an old second edition Tome of Magic at the used bookstore the other day, and flipping through it, I'm like, I could use some of these my 5e games with no changes whatsoever. But no, I think that's a great way to do it. So I have on my desk right now, I have the Fate system, Cyberpunk Red, Call of Cthulhu. Shoot, there's one that I always forget. It's a space, Death in Space is what it's called. Space RPG, also Blades in the Dark. So that's my non D&D world. The challenge for me in playing these other games is that odds are, if I'm playing them, it's because I'm running them. So these are all things that I'm sort of dabbling in, but I don't have any games running in them right now. Mostly because I have so many games running already that I need to bring to a close or find flexible ways to play these other things. But those are the games I'm reading right now. Matthew, what is your favorite folk tale that has given you the most inspiration? And maybe a weird answer is that I'm not sure that I do get a ton of inspiration from things like that. When the things that I read fantasy books as a kid, I don't think that they ever inspired me. When a lot of people into D&D and TTRPGs seem inspired, commonly inspired by a lot of the same stuff. I enjoyed Lord of the Rings as a kid, I think mostly because they were not boring and they had high accelerated reader points for being big books. That's mostly what I remember back then. I wouldn't say that they had a huge influence on me. But Choose Your Own Adventure books did. Goosebumps did. Twilight Zone definitely did. Indiana Jones, right? Movies, TVs, comics. That's where I think I draw the bulk of my inspiration, which is funny because, like, as much as I run, D&D in a fantasy world that's very much with the appearance of something like The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings, I think that where I draw my aspirations from is not necessarily those works. But you draw out of a hat any episode, which I sometimes do, from the original run of the Twilight Zone, and I could probably make a campaign arc around that and have a ton of fun doing it. Matthew, you really like the idea of witch covens, but you're not sure how to run them. I can't say that I know how to run witch covens, but I did finally get a chance to run a proper coven for one of my groups in a town that they visited. They quickly took out each of the witches one by one before they had a chance to fight, before they were in a position to fight multiple at once. Witches are interesting because they'll help each other, but they're not necessarily friendly toward one another. I at least the way I envision them is they're also antagonistic towards one another. They'll lie, cheat, steal. They're only faithful to themselves. That provides a lot of interesting opportunities when a player group is navigating witches, right? Because maybe the witches could be turned on one another. Maybe one of the witches is not as bad as the other witches. But I would generally, in terms of how to run them for combat and things like that, I would just make sure that the Sea Witch, here's the Nightmare Witch, or the Eldridge Witch, here's all of them, and then make sure that there are special, almost layer actions that they can do if they're fighting together. They should get exponentially stronger if more and more of the coven is available for a fight. Cults and cults, I feel are big investigation. I would take inspiration from Lovecraftian horror stories and if you ever played there's a board game called Mansions of Madness that hits this tone and this flavor really well, that an unsettling town and trying to piece together what's going on before they get you to. That's kind of where my mind goes with a cult. As boring as they are to paint, things like sacks of beans or potatoes or whatever these would end up being probably show up on my table the most. Taking the time to paint stuff like this, whether it's for a mimic or not, there's almost always a reason to tuck one of these onto a table or in a corner or in a dungeon or a cellar somewhere. Barrels and crates and just sort of debris, like rocks and grass, like little hills, little rocks, like, yeah, so much of that, the unsung heroes of so many scenes where it's like, wow, I'm really glad that I have these things, even though they're really, really annoying to make, or boring. You know, they're not, it's not, there's nothing really annoying about them. It's just a little tedious. Thanks, Joseph. I appreciate that. Glad you think so. Thanks for popping into the stream. Just coming up with fun monster color combinations. Well, hopefully fun. The goal is fun and interesting, and not just the same tentacle and eye and tongue colors. Actually, my favorite tonight has easily been when realizing I was going to be making a, where is it? This guy. This is a transformed mimic grandfather clock, and in terms of picking the colors, grabbed probably my favorite Goosebumps book ever from the shelf and said, that bird's got blue eyes, that bird's got these weird scales and stuff. It's not a great, it's fine, but it works for me. It made me very happy. And now I need to paint a lot more stuff using Tim Jacobus. I think it's Tim Jacobus. I don't know how to say his last name. I need to look it up. But that guy's art is, his art slaps, right? I use that correctly, right? His art slaps for me. It slaps.